I never thought silence could hurt more than a slap. But that morning, lying in a hospital bed, tubes running from my arm and the smell of disinfectant filling my lungs, I realized silence was his favorite weapon. He stood beside me, my husband, holding my hand like we were a perfect couple, smiling at the nurse, calling me sweetheart. And when our friends arrived, he even kissed my forehead. They all believed him. They all believed us. I remember the nurse's polite smile, her eyes darting between the bruises peeking from under my sleeve. She knew something was wrong. Nurses always know. But she said nothing. He tightened his grip on my hand under the blanket, hard enough to make me flinch, soft enough that no one would notice. "Tell them how you fainted, honey," he whispered, smiling through his teeth. I stared at the IV drip. The slow rhythm matched the beating of my heart. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. If I walked out of that hospital alive, I would never let him tell my story for me again. Before all this, before the bruises and the hospital lights, my life looked ordinary, maybe even enviable from the outside. We lived in a neat little house on Maple Street. White curtains, trimmed hedges, the smell of fresh paint still clinging to the walls. I was proud of it, proud of us. His name was Ethan, my husband. Tall, polite, the kind of man who made everyone feel safe. When we got married, people called us the perfect pair. He was charming, dependable. I was soft-spoken, always smiling. We looked right together, at least in pictures. I used to wake early just to make his coffee the way he liked. 1 spoon of sugar, no cream. He said the bitterness kept him sharp. I'd hum while cooking, always the same song, "You Are My Sunshine." Funny, isn't it? How I used to sing that every morning to a man who would later darken every part of my world. We'd sit at the table together, or rather, I'd sit quietly while he scrolled through his phone. He'd nod occasionally when I spoke, not really listening. I told myself he was just tired. He worked hard. I wanted to be patient. Marriage, my mother once said, was about endurance. I didn't know then that she meant endurance of love, not pain. At first, it was just small things. The sigh when dinner wasn't hot enough. The cold stare when I wore something he didn't approve of. He'd say, "Why do you talk so much?" Or, "Stop being so sensitive." And I'd laugh it off. That's what good wives did, right? But then the words turned to something heavier. Something that left marks. The first time he hit me, it was over spilled soup. A simple mistake. The bowl slicked, burned his hand. He looked at me like I'd done it on purpose. Before I could apologize, his hand struck my cheek. It wasn't the pain that stunned me. It was the silence afterward. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just walked away, as if nothing happened. That night, I stood in the bathroom pressing a cold cloth to my face. The woman in the mirror didn't look like me. She looked scared. And when he knocked gently and said, "I'm sorry, babe, you know I didn't mean it," I believed him. Because I wanted to. He brought flowers the next day. Lilies, my favorite. He cooked dinner. He held my hand. He cried. And I thought, people make mistakes. That's how it started, and once it started, it didn't stop. Months passed, and I learned how to live like someone walking through glass, careful, quiet, always waiting for the sound of a step behind me. I learned the pattern of his moods, the tone in his voice before he'd snap, the way his jaw tightened when something displeased him. I learned to predict danger before it came. He never left visible bruises at first. He was too smart for that. A push, a shove, a grip too tight around my arm, a broken plate that accidentally cut my hand. He'd always apologize afterward, always promise to change, and I, foolishly, fearfully, always forgave him. Neighbors waved when we passed by, saying, "You two are such a lovely couple." They didn't know that sometimes after those walks, I'd lock myself in the bathroom shaking. He hated when I cried, said I made me look pathetic. So I learned to cry silently, biting my sleeve to muffle the sound. Then came the nights, those long, suffocating nights where he'd come home drunk. the smell of whiskey trailing behind him like a storm. He'd slam the door, muttering about work, about money, about me. Sometimes he'd throw things. Sometimes he'd throw me. I remember one night, cold rain outside, thunder shaking the house. He came in soaked, furious, accusing me of turning the world against him. When I didn't answer fast enough, his hand met my face again. I fell against the counter, my head ringing. He grabbed my wrist and hissed, "You think anyone would believe you over me?" Then he walked out, leaving the front door open. I sat there, bleeding and shaking, listening to the rain fill the silence. People say it takes strength to leave, but they don't understand it also takes strength to survive one more day inside it. I stayed because I was scared, because I had nowhere else to go, because part of me still believed in the man I loved. But something in me was breaking, piece by piece, until the day it all fell apart, the day I fainted. It was a Sunday morning. I'd spent the night cleaning after one of his drunken rages. He was still asleep on the couch, an empty bottle dangling from his hand. My body ached, my head spun. When I reached for the broom, my vision blurred, black dots swimming before my eyes. The next thing I remember was the sound of my head hitting the floor, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. White walls, a beeping monitor, the faint scent of antiseptic. And him, sitting there, smiling like nothing happened. He told the doctor I'd collapsed from exhaustion. He stroked my hair when people were watching, and when they weren't, he leaned close and whispered, "Say a word about me and I swear you'll regret it." I looked at him and realized the man I loved was gone. Maybe he never existed at all. When I was discharged from the hospital, I moved slowly, both in body and spirit. The doctor told me I needed rest. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said gently. I wanted to tell her the truth, that it wasn't work that had worn me down, but fear. Yet the words froze on my tongue. Ethan signed the discharge papers, cracked a joke with the nurse, and helped me into the car. To everyone else, he looked like a devoted husband. To me, he was a storm pretending to be calm. He talked the whole way home, mostly about himself. "How embarrassing," he said, shaking his head. "People probably think I don't take care of you." I kept my eyes on the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. "I'm fine," I whispered. He gave a short laugh. "You better be." At home, he tucked me into bed like a dutiful partner. He even made soup, chicken noodle, my favorite once upon a time. But when he set the bowl down, I noticed something strange. There was no gentleness in his movement, no trace of real concern. It was all performance. I realized then that every gesture, every word of his love had become a script he knew by heart. The next week, I kept mostly to myself. I told him I needed time to recover. He seemed pleased with that. Less to talk about, less to control. When he left for work, I'd sit by the kitchen window, the one that looked out to Mrs. Green's garden next door. She was an old widow, kind and quiet. Sometimes she'd wave at me while hanging laundry. One afternoon, she came over with cookies. "You've lost weight, dear," she said softly. "Everything all right?" I nodded quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes lingered on the faint mark near my temple. She said, "You know, if you ever need to talk, my door is always open." That night, Ethan noticed the cookies on the counter. "Where did these come from?" he asked, his tone already edged. "Mrs. Green brought them over," I said. "She was just being kind." He stared at the plate, jaw tightening. "Don't talk to people about our business, understand?" "I didn't," I said quickly. "We just—" He slammed his hand on the counter. The sound made me flinch. "You never learn," he hissed before storming off. I stood there, my hands trembling, staring at the shattered sugar cookies. That was the first clue that something deeper had shifted inside me. For the first time, the fear didn't silence me. It whispered back, "You deserve better." It was about 2 weeks later when I discovered the truth, the one that would finally shatter any illusion I had left about love. Ethan's phone had always been off limits. He guarded it like a secret life. He kept it face down, password locked, even took it into the bathroom. But one night, he came home late and passed out on the couch, his phone slipping from his pocket. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering as I picked it up. The screen lit up. No password. He must have forgotten in his drunken haze. Messages blinked across the display. A woman's name I didn't recognize. Lena. I opened the thread. My breath caught. Lena. "She still believes you, right? Poor thing." Ethan. "Yeah, she's clueless. She'd never survive without me anyway." Lena. "You're terrible." Ethan. "You love it." Photo attachments. Them together, laughing, kissing, in our bed. For a moment, everything inside me went still. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The screen blurred as my tears fell onto it. I dropped the phone, my chest aching like someone had driven a knife through it. I sat on the floor for hours, staring into nothing. When he woke up the next morning, I was still there. He yawned, stretched, rubbed his eyes. "Why are you up so early?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. And then, quietly, I said, "How long have you been seeing her?" The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" he said too quickly. "Don't," I whispered, "please, don't lie anymore." He stared at me for a long moment. Then something changed in his eyes, like a door closing. "Don't go through my things," he said low, dangerously. "I hurt you," I said. "You—" Before I could finish, he stood up, towering over me. His hand came down hard across my face. The sound echoed through the house. I stumbled, hit the table. My vision swam. He stood there, breathing heavily. "You want to play the victim now, huh?" I touched my cheek, felt the sting of blood where his ring had cut me. And in that moment, something in me finally broke. But not the way he wanted. Not with fear. With clarity. I saw him for what he was. Not a husband, not a man, but a coward who needed control to feel powerful. And I realized I wasn't going to die in that house. That night, after he fell asleep again, I crept to the bathroom and locked the door. I looked at my reflection, swollen lip, red cheek, hollow eyes. I whispered to her, the woman staring back at me, "This isn't your fault. It never was." Then I took his phone again. This time, I took photos of the bruises, the cuts, the messages, the photos of him and Lena. I emailed them to myself. Then I deleted the sent messages. When I returned the phone to his pocket, I wasn't trembling anymore. For the first time in years, my hands were steady. I didn't know what I would do next, not yet. But I knew one thing. He would never silence me again. The next morning, he made breakfast like nothing happened. "Sleep well?" he asked with a grin. I looked him in the eyes and smiled. A small, cold smile. "Yes," I said, "better than ever."
He didn't know that I had already begun my escape.
After that morning, the world looked different. The air in the house felt heavy, but no longer suffocating. Because deep down, I had made a silent promise to myself. I was leaving. Not someday. Soon. I started planning quietly, like someone learning to breathe again after years underwater. Every day while Ethan was at work, I gathered small pieces of my life. My ID, a few clothes, some money I had hidden in a tea tin at the back of the pantry. I made copies of everything, the bruises, the texts, the photos. I sent them to an email I created under a different name. Each click, each file uploaded, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But escaping wasn't simple. Not with Ethan. He had a way of watching, even when he wasn't home. Sometimes I'd catch him standing at the doorway, eyes fixed on me, as if trying to read my thoughts. Once he asked suddenly, "You've been quiet lately. What's going on in that head of yours?" I smiled faintly and said, "I'm just tired." He studied me, suspicious, before nodding. "Good, keep it that way." That night when he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and whispered a prayer, not for him, but for courage. The next day, I went to the grocery store alone, the first time he'd allowed it in months. I should have felt free, but fear trailed me like a shadow. At the checkout line, my hands shook as I slipped a folded note to the cashier, a young woman with kind eyes. It said, "If anything happens to me, call the police. My husband's name is Ethan. He hurts me." She read it as I pretended to fix my bag. Our eyes met briefly. She gave the faintest nod. For the first time in a long while, I felt less invisible. 2 days later, I visited Mrs. Green next door while Ethan was still at work. Her home smelled of cinnamon and old books. She poured me tea without asking questions. When I finally told her everything, the bruises, the fear, the hospital, she held my hand tightly. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, eyes filling with tears. "You can't go back there." "I know, but I don't know where else to go." She looked at me, thinking, then said quietly, "You can stay here, just until you figure things out." That small sentence, simple, kind, felt like sunlight breaking through a long storm. I wanted to cry. Instead, I nodded, whispering, "Thank you." That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He seemed different, calm, too calm. "Where were you?" asked. "Next door," I said, "with Mrs. Green." He smirked. "Gossiping again." I said nothing. He grabbed my wrist suddenly, his grip firm. "You think you can make me look bad? You think anyone's gonna believe you?" I winced, but forced myself to meet his eyes. "I don't care who believes me. I just want peace." He froze for a moment, maybe surprised by my tone, then let go. "Peace," he repeated mockingly. "You wouldn't know peace if it hit you in the face." And then he left the room laughing, the sound echoing down the hallway. I knew then, if I didn't leave soon, I might never leave at all. That night, I packed a small bag, 2 sets of clothes, my ID, some cash, and the flash drive with all my evidence. I waited until I heard him snoring. Then I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every creak of the floor felt like thunder. At the front door, I hesitated, not because I doubted my decision, but because I was terrified of what came next. Freedom can be as frightening as captivity. I took one last look at the house. The place where I had cooked meals, tended flowers, laughed once, long ago. Now it was just walls that had memorized my silence.
And then I stepped outside. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Mrs. Green's porch light was on, just like she'd promised. When she opened the door, she didn't say anything. She just pulled me into a hug. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The next morning, while I was sipping tea at her kitchen table, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Mrs. Green peeked through the window, then looked back at me. "It's him," she mouthed. My chest tightened. I could hear his voice outside. Calm, polite. "Morning, Mrs. Green. Have you seen my wife? She went out for groceries last night and didn't come home." I felt sick. He was performing again, the concerned husband. Mrs. Green straightened her back and opened the door just a crack. "No, I haven't seen her. Maybe you should call the police." He hesitated. "Oh, that won't be necessary. She'll come back." Then, lowering his voice, "She always does." I could hear his footsteps retreating down the path. When he drove away, I exhaled shakily. Mrs. Green turned to me. "You can't stay here. Not for long." "I know, but I have a plan." The next day, I went to the police station. It took every ounce of strength I had. When the officer asked, "What brings you here today?" I said, in a voice that didn't sound like my own, "I'm here to report domestic abuse." I handed over the photos, the messages, the bruises. The officer's face changed as he scrolled through them. "Ma'am, you did the right thing." As I signed the report, I realized something powerful. I wasn't the same woman who had fainted on that kitchen floor. Later that evening, I went back to Mrs. Green's house and sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. The sky turned shades of gold and pink, and I thought, maybe this is what peace looks like. But peace wouldn't last long, not with Ethan still out there. He wasn't the kind of man who let go easily. I didn't know then that the real storm was still coming, and that he would try one last time to destroy what little freedom I'd found. It didn't take long for Ethan to realize what I'd done. 3 days after I filed the report, he showed up at Mrs. Green's house again. But this time, he wasn't pretending to be calm. I was in the living room when I heard the pounding on the door. "Open up, Mary," he shouted, his voice echoing through the walls. Mrs. Green froze, her teacup rattling in her hand. "Don't answer," I whispered. But he kept pounding, louder and louder. "You think you can hide from me? You think the police will help you?" I could feel my body trembling, old habits of fear trying to pull me under again. Then, Mrs. Green, bless her brave heart, grabbed the phone and called 911. Her voice was steady. "Yes, I need police assistance immediately. My neighbor's husband is trying to break into my home." Ethan's shouting grew more desperate. "Come out, Mary! You belong to me! You think anyone's gonna believe your lies?" And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I peeked through the curtains. He was standing in the yard, chest heaving, face red with rage. Then he saw me. Our eyes met. His lips curled into a smile. Cold. Terrifying. He mouthed 2 words. "You'll pay." Then he got into his car and sped away. When the police arrived, they took my statement and assured me I was safe. They said they'd already received the evidence I sent earlier, the bruises, the texts, the photos. One officer, a woman about my age, looked at me kindly and said, "You did the right thing. This is how it starts, standing up for yourself." But I knew Ethan wouldn't stop easily. He was too proud, too cruel to accept defeat. For the next week, I stayed with Mrs. Green while the court processed the restraining order. Every sound outside made my heart race. Every night, I locked the doors twice. Still, I tried to rebuild some normalcy. I cooked dinner, helped Mrs. Green water her plants, even started journaling. Writing down the years I'd lost and the pieces of myself I was finding again. Each word I wrote felt like breathing after drowning. A week later, the officer called. "Mrs. Harper, the court hearing for the restraining order is set for Thursday morning. He's been served." My stomach twisted at the thought of seeing him again, but I knew I had to go. Not for revenge, for closure. That morning, I dressed simply, a white blouse, navy skirt, hair tied back neatly. When I looked in the mirror, I saw traces of the woman I used to be, gentle, quiet. But now she had something new in her eyes. Strength. Mrs. Green came with me for support. When we entered the courtroom, my breath caught. Ethan was already there, sitting with his lawyer, smirking. He looked different, angrier, more desperate. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my gaze steady. The hearing began. Ethan's lawyer painted me as unstable, claiming I exaggerated everything. But when my turn came, I stood up and spoke, slowly, clearly, from the heart. I stayed silent for years. I thought love meant patience, forgiveness, but it doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. The room was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the shuffle of papers. Then I handed the judge the evidence, the photos, the texts, the hospital records. Ethan's face shifted. The smirk disappeared. When the judge read through the documents, her expression hardened. "Mr. Harper," she said firmly, "based on this evidence, the court grants the restraining order immediately. You are to have no contact with Mrs. Harper, directly or indirectly. Any violation will result in arrest." Ethan stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's lying." "Sit down," the judge interrupted sharply, "or I will have you removed." For the first time, I saw him powerless. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge I felt. It was relief. The chains had broken. After the hearing, as I walked out of the courthouse, Ethan followed a few steps behind. "Think you've won?" he muttered under his breath. I stopped, turned to him and said quietly, "No, I just stopped losing." Then I walked away, my head held high. When the police escorted him out later that day for violating the restraining order, the neighbors saw everything. The man who once looked like the perfect husband, always smiling, always polite, was handcuffed on his own front lawn. Whispers spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. For years, I had felt invisible, unheard. Now people saw the truth. Not just about him, but about women like me, who suffer in silence behind closed doors. Mrs. Green hugged me when the officers left. "You're free now," she whispered. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe it. The days that followed were quiet. I moved into a small apartment across town, one with sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sound of children playing outside. Every morning, I made coffee and sat by the window with my journal. Some mornings, I cried. Some mornings, I smiled. Healing, I learned, wasn't a straight path. It came in waves. I started volunteering at a women's shelter. Listening to other women's stories, stories of fear, survival, and courage, reminded me that I wasn't alone. We were all pieces of a larger story, one of resilience. Sometimes later at night, I'd think about Ethan. Not with hate, not anymore. Just pity. Because people like him spend their lives breaking others, never realizing they're the most broken of all. One evening, I received a call from Mrs. Green. She told me Ethan had moved away. No one knew where. I thanked her, and after hanging up, I went to my window and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt peace.
Months passed, each one softer than the last. I began to recognize myself again, in small, gentle ways, in the way I laughed with neighbors, in how I hummed while cooking dinner, or how I no longer jumped at the sound of a door closing. My apartment became a sanctuary. The walls were painted pale yellow, warm, forgiving. The shelves filled slowly with books, little plants, and framed photos of new memories. Me and Mrs. Green in her garden, the women from the shelter on our first freedom picnic. Every morning I wrote in my journal before sunrise. Some entries were messy and tear-stained. Others were strong and clear. But all of them carried one truth. I made it out. I often thought of that night, the night I fainted, the night Ethan pretended we were happy. It used to haunt me. Now I saw it as the moment my body rebelled against the silence, the night my soul whispered, enough. Healing wasn't easy. There were days when guilt crept in, a voice whispering, maybe you should have stayed. Maybe you provoked him. But therapy taught me something powerful. Abusers train you to take responsibility for their cruelty, and unlearning that is an act of survival. So, I forgave myself. For staying too long, for believing his words over my own pain, for thinking I was unworthy of love. And slowly, I started doing things I'd once loved, little things he'd forbidden. I painted again, I went to the park and watched families. I even adopted a stray cat that kept showing up at my window. I named her Hope. One afternoon, while volunteering at the shelter, I met a young woman named Lila. She was trembling, clutching a small bag of clothes, her eyes empty in a way I recognized instantly. When she saw the faint scar near my temple, she asked, "Did someone—" I nodded gently. "Yes, but I'm still here." That was the first time I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a lantern, something that could help someone else find their way out of the dark. So I began recording stories, real ones, stories of women who survived, who fought, who healed. That's how my online channel began, a quiet space for truth-telling. When I spoke into that microphone for the first time, my voice trembled. But by the end, it was steady. "I'm not here to tell you how to leave," I said softly. "I'm here to remind you that you can." About a year after leaving Ethan, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note, written in his handwriting. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what I did. I have lost everything. My job, my home, my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I remember. Every word, every look. You were stronger than me. Maybe you always were." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and whispered, "I forgive you, not for you, but for me." Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about releasing myself from the weight of what he did. That night, I lit a candle and sat quietly by the window. Hope curled beside me, purring softly, and for the first time I realized the silence no longer scared me. Sometimes I still think about the woman I was, the one who covered bruises with makeup, who made excuses for cruelty, who whispered apologies she never owed. If I could speak to her now, I'd say, "You were never weak. You were surviving the only way you knew how." I know there are women out there right now, maybe one of them listening to this story, sitting in a room that doesn't feel safe, trying to decide whether they deserve better. To her, I want to say this: you do. You always have.
And no matter what he's told you, you are not alone. When people ask me how I survived, I tell them the truth. I didn't wake up brave one day. I just got tired of being afraid. Courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision you make when no one's watching. It's the first step you take out of the house that tried to kill you. It's choosing yourself over and over again. So, here I am, alive, healing, whole. And if you're listening, maybe you're ready to take your first step too. Life gives us storms, but it also gives us shelter. Sometimes that shelter is a neighbor, a stranger, a small whisper that says, "Keep going." And sometimes it's you, finding your own voice again. I'm not the woman who fainted on that kitchen floor anymore. I'm the woman who stood up, walked out, and built a new life brick by brick. So, to anyone who's ever been silenced, I hope my story helps you find the courage to speak. Would you have done what I did? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments. And if my story touched you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear these words tonight. Because somewhere a woman is still whispering to herself in the dark. And maybe your voice could help her find the light.